Let's talk to Mr. Elias Wakhisi. He's the manager for public policy and research at the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya. That's ICPAK. Elias, good morning.
Good morning, Eric and Wanjiru. Good morning, everybody there.
Morning, Elias.
Everybody is called Ndu.
I guess so.
Oh,
Yeah, she represents the western part of the
I represent
continent.
the world.
Yes.
Thank you.
She's our regional representative. She's a big deal.
thank you.
Okay,
Yes.
welcome to the Situation Room, Elias.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Now, you've heard, we're discussing Finance Bill 2020. And like Wajiro has introduced, let's focus on how we are raising our revenues, okay?
Yes.
With a focus on debt, whatever kind of debt, whether we are borrowing locally, domestically, whether you're borrowing internationally, whether you're borrowing commercially, whether you're looking for concessional loans, whatever it is. And I think the focus here would be also in the public understanding and having a participatory role in this particular one.
Yes.
Particularly how we raise our revenues. So starting from taxation, because we've got to start from there. We raise tax directly. I mean, we give the government money, and then it has some deficit that it needs to plug, and then it goes to the market to plug that deficit, or wherever it goes to plug that deficit. Looking at our tax base, just before we go into the debt, right? Looking at our tax base, we've had this conversation very many years that, KRA needs to widen its tax net so that we can have more and more people contributing to this cake, so that more and more people can then now enjoy the benefits of this. Is it a reality that we can ever get to?
Yes, it is a reality, and I'll start. I've been following that conversation when Wanjiru started on the focus on taxation. And what I can say is, I think as a country, we've been focusing much on the expenditure bit, how much. It's about sharing the cake, not talking about baking the cake. Yes, baking it. That has been the challenge that we've had as a country. But increasingly, a lot of institutions and individuals are now concerned on the issues of taxation. And just coming to your question, I think, first of all, we need to start from where we are as a country. And I can say that over the years, KRA has been doing very well in terms of just collecting. If you start with I think the Kibaki era, where we started reforming the revenue system, we collecting below under $1 trillion in terms of revenue. But then it grew, and just looking at the figures, we've been able even to collect 1-point-something trillion, and the projections have been looking good. Now the challenge has been that we've not been able to, in most cases, to meet the target or to achieve that target of revenue collection, or the target set by Treasury and KRA. And the moment you are unable to meet the target, then it forces you to look for alternative sources of plugging in that budget. Remember, a budget, when you say we have a budget of 3 trillion, it doesn't mean that you have this money in a basket. You're just going to take it. We are relying on revenue, so that once we get revenue, you're able to finance that budget. So the moment you are unable to do that, then you have to either resort to domestic borrowing, or you go to external borrowing, and then you also have to look at other other avenues like grants and other sources of revenue to be able to plug in the budget. So that's where we've been as a country, and that has then brought in the aspect of how do we widen the tax net? How do we widen the tax bracket to be able to bring in quite a number of people?
Yeah.
And let me bring it into perspective in this matter. I was looking at statistics. When you talk about PYE, we only have 2.9 million Kenyans who are salaried. Those are the people who are able to pay the PYE. 2.9 million Kenyans. And you can look at the population of this country. So it means those people who are on wage and all that, they are not captured in the PYE kind of bracket.
Yeah.
Then two, when you look at, I think, was it last year, below 7.9 million Kenyans were able to file their returns. So we have a figure of 7 to 9 9 million who are on ITAX and able to file returns out of, if we talk about a population, and I like using the numbers for elections. When 2017, looking at the registered voters, we had 19.6 million. So I like using that number for this kind of discussion.
Why?
So I like using it because of the fact that these are adults. If I assume that adults who are responsible, they're able to vote, they're able to pay their taxes, they're able to hold their
they're engaged.
Comfortable. They're engaged. Then I like using 19, but it could be much more. It could be 20. It could be 21.
Yeah.
So if you take 9 out of that, you have 10 million Kenyans who are not paying taxes, and that means only a few or a small percentage of the country is shouldering the burden of the whole country.
Right, and then
that is the discussion.
Yeah. So given that's one issue, the tax base. There's a large section that's outside the tax base, but right now we are facing the COVID outbreak, and part of the pressure on government is how do we finance the budget. They have the finance bill, and they've also got some intentions to borrow, and maybe we can discuss the finance bill first. How is the finance bill drawing in this 10 million? And from a point of view of what we call tax justice, is it giving a fair burden on the various actors in the taxation process?
Hi.
Hi.
I think we're losing you.
Okay, are you hearing me now?
Yes, now that's better again.
Oh, great. I was saying before we come to the finance bill, recently we had the Tax Laws Amendment Act that was able to it instituted a number of tax reforms, and that was to be able to cushion Kenyans against the disruption that are caused by COVID-19. And when we look at the Tax Laws Amendment Act, one of the issues was to look at some of the tax heads that will ordinarily be captured under the finance bill.
Yep.
And we are looking at corporation tax, we are looking at PAYE, we are looking at VAT and all that. So the finance bill is building on that, building on the aspect or the issues that were raised or the reforms that came through the Tax Laws Amendment Act. If you can allow for like 2 minutes, I can just point out. One was the aspect of corporation tax, where we're able to reduce from 30% to 25%. And that, for me, it was one of, we can say, there's been debate around it when you compare with our peers, and I'm looking at South Africa, looking at Tanzania, Uganda, Ghana, Sub-Saharan Africa. Our corporation tax was 30, compared with South Africa was 20, 28, Tanzania 30, Uganda 30. There was also the reform of VAT. Ours was 16, compared with South Africa 14, Tanzania 18, Uganda 18. So you can see in terms of having that competitive edge, there was that clamor for that kind of reform. And now reducing corporation tax to 25% then makes it easier for us in terms of residential companies. But of course, there are also other effects to that. And as I come to the finance bill, and we are looking at, as we do all these, and including even the PAYE, we have other issues. As we speak now, a lot of, the one we are talking about cash flows for businesses already as we speak, and MSMEs. We are talking about hospitality industry, a lot of staff layoffs. We saw yesterday, Norfolk and quite a number of institutions under that sector.
Yep.
Transport sector already has a lot of challenges in terms of if it's public service vehicles, they are half capacity, air transport grounded.
Yep.
We're talking about individual incomes affected. So cumulatively, when you look at all these issues, they'll have on the bottom line. The bottom line here, we are looking at how much we'll raise based on the projections that we already given through the budget policy statement as well. Now, coming to the finance bill, the finance bill, as I said, is building on the Tax Laws Amendment Act 2020, which was enacted on 25th April. And one of the issues that they are focusing on is the aspect of digital service tax. And the digital service tax, we are looking at taxation of the digital economy.
What is that actually? Now that you've gotten there, can you just explain what are they targeting to do? Charge you for using Facebook?
Yes. Let me explain. In Finance Act 2019, and just before that, we had a lot of discussions on the digital marketplace.
Yeah.
And we are looking at, we are talking about online transactions. If you are able to buy a book, maybe from Amazon, or using any other online transactions, are we able to tax? Are we able to get revenue from those kind of transactions? And that was really a very big challenge. So in 2019, we introduced that, but still there was no platform for us platform and guidelines for us to really effect that type of tax. In 2020 now, we've just come in strongly, and there's now the introduction of a digital service tax, which is 1.5% on the gross transaction value, so that anytime you are able to conduct any online transaction, then we are able to, government is able to target that and generate additional revenue.
So basically, if you buy anything on Jumia, on Masoko, if you do anything on any of those platforms, now there'll be a tax.
So precisely, that's the thinking behind digital service tax.
On the consumer, however, or on the seller, on the buyer or on the seller?
On the buyer as well, because the seller, think about it this way, yeah? The seller is based in, let's say, Eric, you talked about Iceland.
Yep.
So if you are buying from an online platform in Iceland, then we have to pick. We have to target the consumer because the service is in Kenya. So the moment the purchase is done by a resident in Kenya, then it attracts the digital service tax. However, we still do not have regulations. So we'll still, after this, we need to come up with regulations as a country and guidelines for implementation. Others, without the guidelines, then we still have the gray areas on how do we go about in terms of implementing.
And very contentious areas, even in describing and definitions of online transactions.
Yes, it's a contentious issue. It needs a lot of debate and a lot of stakeholder input for us to be able to effect that. But hopefully that's one of areas, because a lot of transactions are now going online, and that's one of the issues we are seeing in the new finance bill.
What are the other proposals in the finance bill? Because I think we can come back and speak to this specifically, but there are a number.
Yes.
Some of those proposals even negating what was enacted in April. What are the other proposals?
The other proposals we have, the bill proposes, by the way, to also repeal exemptions previously granted on income on home ownership savings plan. And here we are looking at the people who saved under that home ownership saving under the National Social Security Fund. And initially that was exempted in the Income Tax Act. But then this bill is repealing that, and majorly to get additional revenue. Again, there are challenges that as you do that, what happens to the guys the people who had already saved under that kind of under that scheme?
Yeah.
Again, there are issues around that. The other aspect that is coming in is the bill also proposes to tax bonuses, impose taxes on bonuses, overtime, and retirement benefits paid to employees whose taxable employment income maybe is at the lowest band. And when you look at this was a proposal in the tax laws amendment bill, but it was rejected by National Assembly. So it's being introduced again through the Finance Bill 2020. Again, we'll be keen to see what the National Assembly and the Finance and Budget, the Finance and Planning Committee says on this, given that it was rejected earlier. But interestingly, there is a very good proposal on amnesty. There is now an introduction of an amnesty program, and we've had this clamor, a lot of discussions around it, that as a taxpayer you can ask for amnesty so that you are given a grace period to be able to pay tax. And this is now a good proposal that has been introduced in the finance bill.
I don't know whether
The other proposal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Now,
Yes,
I was about to ask you, so I don't know whether you describe this as a very good proposal, the one
Yes.
where now the Treasury wants to start taxing loss-making entities.
Yes, that's the minimum tax.
Mm.
The minimum tax has already is implemented in Tanzania, in Angola, and some other countries, and they are saying there are those entities that are in perpetual loss-making situation.
Yeah.
You are always a loss-making entity.
But you're in business.
So, but you're in business. You know that kind of engagement.
Yes.
You're in perpetual loss-making.
Yes.
And that is the essence of that particular proposal. That there is a minimum tax that you pay. Again, we look at what stakeholders say about that.
Mm.
I think it's a proposal that is worth looking at without throwing it out entirely, because of what I said earlier in terms of either is it a scheme for you not to pay tax, or is it genuine that you are perpetually making loss? So that's something that we need to look at.
Elias, when we look at the scenario now, of course, government, I think with the April amendments, lost about 100 billion in revenue due to the tax changes that they felt were necessary to cushion businesses and taxpayers. Now, as we look at this finance bill, where is government proposing to make that money? So that it can respond to COVID, but also, finance its business. And is this finance bill are these short-term measures, or are they strategic measures that government will continue to implement?
I'll say they are strategic measures, but just to start with your earlier question, one of them I said is the digital tax, service tax. And then we have other VAT-related amendments that, one, they are changing the status of VAT supplies, like from taxable to exempt. There is one that is also proposing to change from zero-rated to standard rate, and one that is being changed is the LPG, the liquefied petroleum gas, is moving from zero-rated to standard rate. That is aimed at also generating additional revenue. We are also looking at input and raw materials for some of electrical appliances, agricultural pest control. Of course, they'll have an impact on the households or the sectors that are affected, but government is looking at raising additional revenue from those particular. Yes, they are strategic, but as you all know, every year we have these the finance bill. Every year you are able to then relook.
Elias, we are losing you. You're not clear.
Yes.
I think we are losing you, Elias. Are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Yes, that's better.
So I was saying that one is the digital tax service, DST, digital service tax. We're able to raise revenue. There are also other VAT-related proposals. And I gave an example of LPG, that liquefied petroleum gas, which is moving from zero-rated to standard rate. Of course, that is aimed at raising revenue, but on the other hand, you can look at it from this angle. If we are pushing for green energy, we are pushing for conservation, then if this type of LPG, then people will then resort to maybe using other.
Let's take a break, take a look at weather and traffic, and then we'll see if we can get Elias for a couple more minutes on air. Something wrong with his line, I think. But it's a situation with Kenya's biggest conversation. It's now 26 minutes after 8. Let's do weather, let's do traffic, let's see what's happening on the roads, and then we come back and look at the Finance Bill 2020 and the proposals that are contained in there. And if you'd like to join this conversation, you can call in 0719 012 600. That's 0719 012 600. I have a couple of questions, especially on those kind of things like introducing now tax on LPG or introducing tax on loss-making entities. Yes, it's happening in other countries. So what? Good morning.
detail, and we possibly don't have the time to get into a lot of detail. So our larger question is how is this bill going to assist government in raising money to respond to the shortfall it already has in revenue? And keeping in mind that Kenyans are sitting at home, so they are also financially impacted. Is this going to squeeze us more? So do you support the proposals in this finance bill to see us through COVID and to keep and not push Kenyans more into the red?
Thank you, Anjiro, and I hope you can hear me now.
It's better, yes.
Great. So I was saying before we went for break, I was saying that there are quite a number of proposals, and I'd mentioned a few. The others that I can share, one of them is I'd mentioned the bonus for low-income earners, and here we're talking about bonuses for overtime and retirement benefits. These will have an impact, of course, on the low-income earners. But as we earlier introduced, there's still this is one way of where government wants to raise revenue. The other way is the taxation of monthly pension for persons aged 65. I'd pointed out that this was in the tax laws amendment bill before Parliament. However, National Assembly rejected that proposal in the effect that these, in fact, are more vulnerable people, and of course, even with COVID, they are the more vulnerable in terms of the impact of COVID to them. Mm-hmm. So the proposal then removes the exemption. Initially, they were exempted under the Income Tax Act, but then it brings them back into the tax net. The other proposal, I'd mentioned the aspect of home ownership scheme. And again, this was exempted earlier. It was introduced in the Tax Laws Amendment Act bill, again rejected. But National Treasury sees and care that these are another avenue that we can use to be able to raise revenue. The other aspects that we'll also touch on ordinary Kenyans, we are looking at member subscriptions. Like if you subscribe to a membership club, then those are also being targeted. We are looking at club subscriptions for paid up employees. Again, the bill is targeting to raise that and to be able to raise additional revenue. And I'd mentioned VAT. On VAT, I mentioned the aspect of liquefied petroleum gas. I mentioned aspect of raw materials for electrical appliances and LPG again. There are other aspects we are picking on excise duty, and excise duty. Again, there is an increase in coverage for alcoholic beverages. As you all know, when we talk about alcoholic beverages, we are talking about sin tax. That in as much as we increase the taxation of that kind of element, still consumers will consume because it doesn't respond. It's seen as a luxury, and they are targeting. We are talking about spirits, liquors. We are talking about beer and cider. So the increasing coverage of alcoholic content in the finance bill. And lastly, we are talking about other aspects are mainly about administrative. Here they are targeting Tax Procedures Act, Kenya Revenue Act, like increasing the capacity or to provide training for its staff so that it's able to implement its role. So yes, as I said earlier, the finance bill is aimed as raising additional revenue in addition to what we had anticipated in terms of tax reforms in the Tax Laws Amendment Act. And as Anjiro had put that earlier, the Tax Laws Amendment Act, through that, I think government will lose quite a number of resources. We are talking about PAYE losing approximately 50 billion in terms of revenue, and that has to be plugged. So in essence, it means that if we are not able to raise sufficient revenues to cover our budget, then one will resort to either domestic borrowing or external borrowing. But most importantly, the government has been talking about fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation here, we're talking about austerity measures, we're talking about revenue rationalization and reducing expenditures here and there to be able to match certain aspects and to be able to deliver and especially delivering even on the big four agenda. Of course, now that becomes a big challenge with COVID-19.
Now that you've brought us there, when we talk about, and you started by telling us the budget is not that you have money in a basket and then you decide what you're going to do, is you start with a
Yes.
wish list on both sides.
Yes.
My wish is that I'm hoping to raise this amount of money, and
Yes.
I'm going to spend that amount of money this way. Now, then you are met with the reality. Are you going to be able to raise 2.7 trillion shillings so that you can spend 2.7 trillion shillings? Starting with the basics, that what you're talking about, there is now already a reduction in the chances of you raising that much payee. And that was just talking about payee for those, the amount of money that you've reduced, assuming that everybody still retained a job. But the other reality is that many other people have also lost their jobs. So even the chances of getting payee from those that were earning 24,000 and above has also reduced. Then there's all the other realities. Must we still be having a budget of 2.7 trillion shillings? Why can't we just start with a lower budget? Go back to a trillion shillings, for instance.
I think that's what we need to do. And allow
Elias, your phone again.
Yes, you can hear me now.
Yes.
That has been the debate for quite some time, that our budget, we've been growing our budget for the last 5 years. We had 1.9, we moved to 2 trillion, we moved to 2.3. Last year we had 3 trillion, we are now talking about 2.7 trillion. I think it's high time for us to relook at that budget in view of what is happening with COVID-19. I've just retaken my figures. When you look at, as I said, PAYE, we lose like 19.8 billion because of the new changes.
Yep.
Corporation tax, we lose close to 45 billion. Turnover tax that was to cushion MSMEs and small and medium enterprises, we lose around 50 billion. The aspect of VAT from 16% to 14%, we lose another 49 billion.
Mm-hmm.
So it means cumulatively we are losing close to 120-something billion out of what was budgeted. So it makes sense for us to relook at our budget, cut some, we call them priority spending. We have to really relook at our budget, look at our expenditure, and look at some of the luxury expenditures that we've had as a country, so that we're able to really work within what we are able to raise.
So all of this, is it possible? Is it possible? I mean, we can talk about this and talk about what has been put down on paper and what has been drafted, but is it possible to actually get this done? Because one thing that we do know about COVID is that it is not a permanent state of affairs. Things will change as we probably move forward. So now all of these factors that are being put in place, is it possible to actually have it rolled out so it goes from being a bill to actually being action?
It's not possible to reduce the budget for now, because as you all know, the budget starts way back in August of every year, so it's a long process. So where we'll have to take that budget through, and already it's before Parliament, before Finance and budget committees. They are looking at the budget. So it's not possible to really say you are reducing drastically from 2.7 to maybe 2.1. What we'll do, we might reduce to maybe 2.5 there, but then seek additional support from development partners. As we speak, I think IMF and World Bank have already given us close to 191 billion to be able to plug in any budget deficit. So definitely what we'll do is to look further into going back to the market, going to borrow to be able to finance our budget. But going forward from August this year, when we start a new cycle, we'll have then to take very deliberate steps in terms of relooking at our budget, in terms of relooking at our expenditure and looking at our priority areas, so that we're able to work within our means.
Elias, is what you're telling us then, our finance bill then is not realistic. It's not based on evidence and ability to pay. I still wanted to hear whether you think the measures being proposed are fair from a tax justice point of view. And then also we have a budget presently being debated in Parliament that is also not realistic. But maybe we
Yes,
can
yes.
focus on the revenue side. We said we're looking at revenue side today. So the finance bill you're saying is not realistic.
For now, it's not realistic because we are talking about the losses, both from individual income perspective.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
We are talking about losses both from individual income perspective.
Right.
We're talking about farms not being able to finance their expenditure. We are talking about global disruptions. Already, we are talking about industries that rely on imported materials. For instance, they are not able to import and implement or run their activities. We are talking about business uncertainty and even reduced working hours. These have an impact on the overall revenue generation. We are talking about even the issues of slowdown in investment. Very few institutions are now investing because it is a wait and see approach. What will happen? How long will this pandemic drag on? We're talking about closure and even scaling down of operations of businesses and companies. So this will have an impact on the overall revenue, and that's why I said earlier that it is a bit unrealistic to in terms of raising some of those measures we put in place in the finance bill, because we don't have these businesses are not working, individuals are not working, and there are all these layoffs. So we'll have really to tighten our belt for us to be able to finance our budget.
So we see more borrowing on the horizon, or more attempts to borrow.
More borrowing, and more borrowing both domestically and externally.
Unless we can consolidate, rationalize ruthlessly.
We need to rationalize. In fact, we've had this program for fiscal consolidation for for the last 3 years. That's where we need to go now, to rationalize, to look at maybe travel, maybe look at issues around conferencing, look at issues around per diem. There are so many other things that
Has
we
it
need to
borne
start.
any fruits? Because we've had this conversation, like you say, we've had this conversation ongoing, and government doesn't seem able to stop spending on unnecessary things.
It hasn't borne any fruit because we started last year. I think last year there was a circular by the CS in terms of introducing austerity measures, but it's not been able to bear any fruit. Hopefully, going on this year, we expect to maybe appropriation bill and any other instrument to be able to entrench more additional measures, and also to look at spending so that you can only spend on those projects. One, you can focus on the pending projects. For instance, there are those pending projects that were due for completion. That's one way you can go about it so that you don't start any new project. That has been a clarion call by the president for quite some time, but that has not worked. We also look at maybe spending on pending bills, because we have like 13 billion out there owed to suppliers. Maybe if that is paid, then they can be able to work. They can be able to restart their businesses and to generate additional revenue. So there's a lot that we need to do in terms of supporting these small businesses, but also reducing on expenditure. The only challenge is that we hope that when you reduce, then service delivery won't suffer. The challenge will be suffering with the service delivery, so that citizens are not able to use services.
Is there any indication, Elias, we are now going to June? Is there any indication at all, anywhere in the horizon, that the government is about to change and start operating things differently? For example, you're saying, let's cut back on the excess fat. Let's not start new projects. Let's support the areas that need serious support. If you look at healthcare and ensuring that healthcare works, ensuring that the small businesses are supported, and actually getting that to work. Is there any sign in the horizon that this is likely to happen in the next financial year?
I can only say hopefully there is a change. Hopefully, because of COVID, we'll be able to reflect as a nation and think through that. The only challenge we're seeing a lot of, again, talking about going back to politicking, and I don't think that could be the issue. We need to change, and here we are looking at our parliament. If parliament can also do their oversight role, so that they keep the government in check. So they say, hey, the way you are spending is not really sustainable. We need to look at these expenditures. We need to look at what are your priorities, and that has to cut across the entire government. We are looking at all ministries, all departments, all agencies, and even county government. We go even down there so that we prioritize service delivery. So hopefully, my view is hopefully we'll see light. Hopefully, there will be a change in direction and focus on post-COVID recovery.
You be optimistic,
more.
Elias. You just be optimistic. When reality hits,
but I
talk
say
to
That's
us.
why we're encouraged to be a praying nation.
I said we hope and pray. We hope and pray that these things will change. But if it's business as usual, then we are going to we are in for a road show.
We're in for
Business
trouble.
as usual, we're in for trouble.
And then there was a question we also had. What's the implication of all of this? What's the situation with domestic debt? And you know, is that a comfortable situation? Is that getting better? Is government eyeing that? As ICPAK, I know you've been very vocal on that because of the impact it has on businesses.
Yes. We are not getting better in terms of domestic debt. And we all know that the impact of domestic debt to private investments. When you look at previous figures, I think we are around 3-point-something trillion in terms of domestic debt. Here we're looking at borrowing from commercial banks. We are looking at treasury bills and bonds. And when you do that, you are able to. When you do that, you are siphoning the resources.
Sorry, we're losing you.
Yes, I was saying when you do that, when you increase domestic borrowing, the danger is the resources meant for private investments then are really taken up, and the private sector is in economics they call it crowding out. Is left out, and they are unable to borrow. It has a huge implication on that. And two, it's also likely to push up the interest rates in the economy, and because most of these domestic or internal debt, their maturity is normally shorter, and sometimes the interests are higher compared to external debt, and that makes the obligation on part of government to be a bit higher. So it's not really a good state to be in, and we hope that going forward that aspect won't be there.
Has government shown an intention to borrow domestically in its pronouncements around how to finance COVID and finance the budget moving forward?
That intention hasn't been there, but you just have when you look at the statistics. In fact, it's neck and neck when you compare domestic debt and public debt. Not public debt. When you compare domestic debt and external debt, they are more like by February this year, our domestic debt was 3.0 trillion. External debt was 3.1 trillion. So they are neck and neck. You can't separate them and say the intention is now to go out. We've been, for the last 5 years, borrowing, I think, at the same level, both domestically and externally. And going by those trends and by that statistic, then it means we'll still continue to borrow domestically as well.
Look at their character, and you know this is how they'll still do the same thing.
Hey,
Elias,
they still do the same thing.
Elias,
They still do the same thing.
I think you've spoilt our weekend,
They still do the same.
which is just
Neck and
really staying at home. But now we are staying at home with the thought that there is no plan, really. We don't have a realistic budget. We don't have a realistic finance bill. And our debt situation continues to be bad, and all indications are it will get worse. And I think maybe we need to tell government, get real, give us something that makes sense.
Yeah, and still hope and pray that they even listen to that.
To that one that makes sense.
Elias Wakhisi, thank you very much for speaking to us.
The only challenge we've had, Eric, is we have, I can say, a docile population in terms of talking about the aspects of revenue. Most people talk about, they are able to speak about governance, they're able to, whenever there's an injustice, you'll see people rising up. But very few people come up strongly and say, we need to look at our finance.
Challenge goes to that institution that you work in, Elias. And I'm telling you this directly.
Eric is passing the buck, Elias. Don't agree.
Listen, the
No, I don't
Institute of
agree
Public
to that.
Accountants of
Eric
Kenya,
also
you
has
guys,
to do
you guys
something.
have a role in educating us. When you come and start telling us about budget and tell us, like now 3.5 billion shillings, rationalization, you've got to break down this communication.
Majority of the people are not
So
going to
that we
understand an
follow.
iota of what you're saying. Think about the majority of the people
But
for whom this makes a difference. They're not going to be to be able to understand what we're saying. So I think there is a shared responsibility in making this information palatable and understandable at the very basic unit to people.
Elias, I
then
think
we
as
can
a
push
country,
this. I can hear you.
we always point fingers, but as we sit here listening to you,
Yes.
professional sector, civil society, media, at least we are talking. And out of this, we have to ask ourselves, how do we communicate this better? Because actually the rain begins to beat us on the issues you're talking about. Not what
Definitely.
not just the corruption. And in fact, they say there's more corruption on the revenue side
Yep.
than there is on domestic side. So it's
On the domestic side.
it's very possible people are paying taxes much more than what we see, but that is going into people's pockets. So
Yes,
so I am with you, Elias. You've spoiled my weekend, but maybe sometimes we need a bad weekend to realize things are bad, and
Yeah,
and we
to wake
need to
up
step up.
Me, my weekend has not been spoiled.
Yeah, I didn't
I'm
expect
still living
anything
in that
different.
reality.
I didn't expect anything
It's
different.
exactly
So,
the same. Elias Wakhisi, thank you
That is
very
the reality
much.
of the situation.
Yeah.
yeah, status quo maintained.
Status quo.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Asante
Thank
sana.
you so much.
The
Thanks,
phone lines are
Elias.
now